A mid-morning call turned me, a widow in my 60s, into the enemy. My son was dead, but his wife's voice was cold, calculating. Before I could even grieve, I was thrown out of the house he bought, dismissed as just an old woman living on a pension. She thought she'd inherited everything. She had no idea what one sentence in his will was about to do. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 62 years old, a retired high school teacher living a quiet, solitary life in the suburbs of Minneapolis. Since my husband passed, the house has been too large, but it's full of memories. My only son, Ethan, had moved to Denver years ago, building a life and a company I was fiercely proud of. The quiet of that Tuesday morning was ordinary. I was at the counter, waiting for the coffee to brew, looking out at the neighbour's stubborn oak tree still holding onto its leaves. The phone rang. I smiled, assuming it was Ethan he sometimes called on his way to the office. But it wasn't his voice. It was Sabrina Cole, his wife. "Ethan's gone." Her voice was flat, sterile, as if she were reading an office memo. There was no tremor, no grief, just airless fact. "What, Sabrina? What are you saying?" The coffee pot gurgled, a stupid, normal sound in a world that had just tilted off its axis. "His heart stopped last night," she continued, in that same horrifyingly neutral tone. "It was his time, I suppose. His time, but I just spoke to him." I started, my mind flashing to his cancer diagnosis, but also to the hopeful conversation we'd had just 2 weeks prior. "Listen, Margaret, I have to handle things." Her voice sharpened, cutting off my budding protest. "The arrangements. I'll take care of it. There's no need for you to fly out just yet." And then, before I could scream, before I could ask how, before I could demand to speak to a doctor or even just weep with her, she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the phone buzzing with a deadline in my hand. The shock was a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs. My son, my only child, gone. But underneath the tidal wave of grief, a cold seed of unease began to sprout. No need to fly out. What did that mean? Her apathy, her control, it wasn't grief. It was administration. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the computer mouse. But I booked the very first flight to Denver. The hours on the plane were a pressurized hell. I replayed every conversation. Ethan's cancer had been a hard fight, but his doctors had been clear he had months, perhaps a year with the new treatments. Just 2 weeks ago, he'd sounded tired but optimistic. "We're fighting this? Mom," he'd said. "I'm not done yet." I thought back on the last few years, ever since Sabrina entered his life. The subtle, chilling distance. Ethan, always so warm, suddenly became harder to reach. Our weekly calls dwindled. Christmas visits became, "We're going to Aspen with Sabrina's friends." My own trips to Denver, once spontaneous and joyful, became regimented affairs, scheduled weeks in advance, always with Sabrina present, smiling a tight, polite smile that never reached her eyes. When the cab pulled up to their house in the wealthy Denver suburb, the wrongness I felt on the phone intensified. It was a beautiful, modern fortress, but the gate was slightly ajar. The security cameras, usually pointed inward, were aimed directly at the street. There was no black wreath on the door, no cars of mourning friends lining the curb. It looked like any other day. I rang the bell, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sabrina opened the door. She was dressed in tight, dark wash jeans and a cream-coloured cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her eyes were bone dry. She stood squarely in the doorway, blocking my path, looking at me as if I were a delivery person. Sabrina. My voice broke on her name. Instinct took over. The desperate need of a mother to find purchase in this nightmare. I moved to hug her, to hold on to the only other person who should be feeling this loss. She flinched and took a half step back, avoiding my embrace. "You can come in for a moment," she said, her voice like ice. "But you need to understand. The house is mine now." I stumbled past her, the sheer audacity of that statement not yet computing. "Where is he, Sabrina? I need to see him. I need to see my son." She sighed, an impatient sound. "He's not here. I already had the funeral home come and collect the body." She looked at her watch. "It was just more efficient to get it done early." Efficient? The word echoed in the cavernous, silent foyer. She hadn't said him. She'd said the body. I was being shut out, not just from her fabricated grief, but from the very last moments of my own son's existence. I was no longer a mother. I was an inconvenience. The foyer opened into a vast, cold living room. It was immaculate. Too immaculate. I realized with a jolt that Ethan was gone from the room, not just physically, but his essence. The side table that always held his running magazines and medical journals was clear. The small basket of medications he kept near the couch had vanished. I looked at the mantelpiece, my breath catching. The large, stylized portrait of him and Sabrina at their wedding remained, but the smaller, silver frames were gone. The photo of Ethan as a gap-toothed 8-year-old on his first bicycle. The photo of the two of us, my arms around him at his college graduation. They hadn't been packed away. They had been erased. "I'm redecorating," Sabrina said, her voice sharp, as if she'd caught me inspecting the dust. She walked to the center of the room, turning slowly, like a new proprietor assessing her inventory. "Ethan left everything to me. Margaret, the house, the stocks, all his shares in Nova Pulse Diagnostics. Everything." She stopped and faced me, her expression devoid of anything but hard business. "I'm telling you this now so there are no misunderstandings. You shouldn't expect to touch a single dime. He wanted me to have it all." I was still trying to process the idea that she was discussing finances while our grief was less than a day old when a sound came from the hallway. A man in a sharp, dark suit stepped out of Ethan's study. He was in his 50s, carrying a leather briefcase, and he looked perfectly at ease. "Ah, Sabrina," he said, his voice smooth. He glanced at me with polite, dismissive disinterest. "Daniel? Perfect timing. This is Margaret, Ethan's mother," Sabrina said. The way she emphasized mother made it sound like a distant, irrelevant relation. "Daniel Price," the man said, offering a hand I didn't take. My arms felt like lead. "I'm the attorney representing the family during this difficult time." His eyes, however, never left Sabrina. He wasn't representing the family. He was representing her. "I was just explaining the situation to Margaret," Sabrina said, adopting a tone of weary, patronizing patience. She turned to Daniel, but her words were clearly aimed at me, a performance for her new ally. "She's just an old woman, living on a pension. She gets forgetful. She tends to make things dramatic. I'm sure this is all a lot for her to process." I felt the blood drain from my face. She wasn't just shutting me out. She was actively painting me as senile. as an unreliable witness. "The funeral," I managed to say, my voice thick. "When is the funeral I want to help plan?" He always wanted the Vivaldi piece." Sabrina let out a short, almost amused puff of air. "Oh, that's all been handled. I've already chosen everything. A beautiful, modern service at the main cathedral. It's all been booked. It's done to my taste." "My taste, not his." She plucked a single sheet of paper from a stack on the desk and handed it to me. It wasn't a list of suggestions. It was an itinerary, a schedule. I was being given my orders for my own son's farewell. My eyes snagged on the folder Daniel Price was holding. It wasn't the cream-coloured parchment of a traditional law firm. It was dark blue, and in the corner, embossed in silver, was the unmistakable geometric logo of Nova Pulse Diagnostics, Ethan's company. This wasn't Ethan's personal estate lawyer. This was the corporate counsel. The realization must have shown on my face, because Sabrina's demeanor snapped from dismissive to hostile. The performance was over. "I think you should go, Margaret. As you can see, Daniel and I have a lot to get through." She walked me to the door, her hand not quite touching my back, but propelling me forward nonetheless. "Please, don't disturb the transition of assets." Transition of assets. Not mourning period. Not family arrangements. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, the sound final, echoing in the sterile entryway. I made it to my rental car, my hands shaking so violently I dropped the keys on the pavement. I fumbled for them, got inside, and locked the doors. The silence of the car was absolute. The dam of my shock finally broke. But it wasn't just grief that poured out. It was rage. A cold, clear, analytical rage. She wasn't just a grieving widow. She was a predator. She had collected the body. She had hidden my pictures. She had the corporate lawyer in my son's office before his body was even cold. Discussing the transition of assets. I was being railroaded. They thought I was just a forgetful old woman on a pension. They had forgotten who I was. I taught high school in a rough district for 35 years. I'd handled plagiarism rings, sophisticated cheaters, and the kind of insidious bullying that happens right under the teachers' noses. I recognized manipulation when I saw it. I saw the patterns. Sabrina wasn't just cold. She was strategic. My breathing steadied. The tears stopped. I would not let her erase him. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Arthur Jennings, my oldest friend. A retired litigator back in Minnesota. I explained everything. The words tumbling out, cold and precise. The phone call, the dry eyes, the house, the lawyer. Arthur listened, his silence a comfort. When I finished, his voice was gravel. "Margaret, you listen to me. Write down every single thing you remember, every word, every look, the time of the call. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. And tomorrow morning, you are going to find the meanest, smartest estate lawyer in Denver. This isn't a funeral. Maggie. It's a hostile takeover." I arrived at the funeral home an hour early, needing time alone with Ethan before the performance began, but the performance was already underway. The main chapel was filled with enormous, ostentatious floral displays I knew Ethan would have hated. And the front row, my son's front row, was already roped off with velvet cords. Small, printed, reserved cards placed on every seat. Sabrina's friends, her business partners, her entourage. A polite usher, clearly following strict instructions, directed me to the second row. I was seated behind a hedge fund manager I vaguely recognized from Ethan's company launch, as if I were a mere colleague, or worse, a distant acquaintance. I was not a mother. I was an attendee. The room filled, and the atmosphere was sickeningly light. It wasn't a gathering of mourners. It was a high-end networking event. Sabrina, draped in a perfectly tailored black dress that looked more like couture than morning wear, glided between clusters of men in expensive suits. She shook hands. She accepted air kisses. I heard her laugh, a short, delicate trill, quickly stifled and replaced by a sad smile. I watched her talk to a group near the door, her expression animated as she spoke of our shared vision and continuing Ethan's legacy at Novapulse. She was auditioning for the role of CEO. Then came the eulogy. Her performance was masterful. She dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a black lace handkerchief as she painted a picture of herself as a saint. She spoke of her tireless 24/7 vigil at his bedside. A lie. I knew his care nurses. His last words, she whispered into the microphone, her voice breaking with practiced sorrow, were to me, he said, Sabrina, I'm at peace because I'm entrusting everything to you. You're the only one I trust. A hot, violent rage, so potent it made me dizzy, surged through me. My son, the man who debated philosophy and loved cynical British comedies, had never in his life uttered a sappy, sentimental sentence like that. He was a man of direct, clear, often blunt words. That line wasn't Ethan. It was pure Sabrina. My gaze drifted from her theatrics to the very back of the chapel. In the last 2 rows, huddled together, were a few people who looked genuinely lost. They were dressed in simple, respectful clothes, not designer labels. Their eyes were on the casket, not on Sabrina. I recognized a few faces from old company picnics, Ethan's people, the engineers, the lab techs. One was a young woman with a pale, worried face. She was watching me, not Sabrina, and her eyes were filled with a startling, profound sympathy. After the service, as people moved to the reception area, I felt a presence beside me. It was a man from that back row, tall and thin, with a face etched in exhaustion. Mrs. Hale, he whispered, not making eye contact with me, instead scanning the room. I'm Aaron Blake. I am, the lead engineer at Novapulse. Aaron. Yes. Ethan spoke of you often. He said you were the only one who could keep up with him. Aaron's face crumpled slightly. He was a good man, the best I've ever worked for. He leaned closer, his voice dropping so low I could barely hear him. Listen, Mrs. Hale, something's not right. Ethan, he was worried. The last few weeks. He was asking me for back-end data. He was tracking irregular money transfers, large ones, all authorized by Sabrina. Before I could respond, the young woman I'd seen earlier appeared. She looked terrified, but determined. Mrs. Hale, she said. So fast, the words blurred. My name is Olivia Brooks. I'm in accounting. She pressed a business card into my palm, her fingers cold and damp. Call me. If you want to know where the company money is really going, call me. But please, don't let her see you with this. She already has. Sabrina's voice, sharp as glass, cut through the air. She had materialized behind them. She immediately put on her public face, draping an arm around my shoulders in a suffocating, possessive gesture. Oh, Margaret, you look so overwhelmed, she said loudly for everyone to hear. You poor thing. Everyone, please, let's give Mrs. Hale some space. She's been so distraught. She's hardly making sense. Her eyes, however, locked on Aaron and Olivia. It was a look of pure, unadulterated warning, a predator marking her territory. Aaron stepped back, his face pale. Olivia looked like she was going to be sick. The act continued in the reception. I stood alone, holding a cup of coffee I didn't want, and Sabrina made a point of addressing a group of investors, loudly enough for me to hear. "It's just so sad," she said, shaking her head. "She's been struggling with her mental state ever since her husband passed. She gets paranoid, thinks everyone is against her. I'm just trying to protect Ethan's memory, but she's making it difficult. She was branding me old, unstable, forgetful. A crazy old woman. I felt the stares, the pity, the dismissal. They were all buying it. I set my cup down. I understood her game now. This was a preemptive strike. She was discrediting me before I could ever become a threat. I turned, walked out of the crowded room, past the flowers that smelled of lies, and into the cold, clean Denver air. I did not cry. I stood on the sidewalk, my hand clutching the small, precious card Olivia had given me. This wasn't a war I had asked for, but it was a war I would finish. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Arthur had given me. "Yes," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. "I need to speak with Julia Grant. It's about my son's estate." Julia Grant's office was not the cold, intimidating legal fortress I had expected. It was in a restored brick building in downtown Denver, filled with overflowing bookshelves, comfortable-looking armchairs, and the scent of old paper and lemon polish. It felt like a sanctuary. Julia herself was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a way of listening that felt active, almost tensile. She held a pen over a yellow legal pad and did not interrupt me once. I told her everything. I started with the flat, cold voice on the phone, the no need to fly out. I described the immaculate house, scrubbed clean of my son's life. I detailed the reserved front row at the funeral, the networking atmosphere, the horrifyingly false eulogy. I recounted Sabrina's loud, public claims of my senility and the arrival of the corporate lawyer, Daniel Price. I finished by placing Olivia Brooks's damp business card on her desk. Julia tapped her pen against the pad for a long moment. "As his wife, Sabrina has a great deal of immediate power," Julia said, her voice calm and precise. "She has the right to make funeral arrangements, the right to secure the marital home. But this," she waved her pen over her notes, "this is not grief. This is a scorched earth strategy, the speed of the cremation, blocking you from the home, and bringing in corporate counsel before the will has even been read. That's not just irregular. Mrs. Hale, it's aggressive." She leaned forward. "You said you were a teacher." 35 years, I said. "High school. I've seen it all." "I believe you," Julia said, a small, grim smile touching her lips. "You're a professional observer. You're not easily manipulated, and you're not prone to hysteria, no matter what your daughter-in-law says. That's good. They are underestimating you. We will use that." In that moment, I knew I had found the right person. This wasn't just a lawyer-client relationship. It was an alliance. "Here's what I propose," Julia continued, her tone shifting to command. "We need information, and we need it yesterday. I work with a private investigator. Her name is Rosa Martinez. She's former FBI, specializing in financial crimes. She left the bureau because, in her words, the paperwork was boring. She's practical, a little cynical, and she has an allergy to fraudulent people. Julia sketched out a three-pronged plan. First, Julia would handle the legal framework. She would file a notice of interest in the estate, officially putting Sabrina and her lawyer on notice that I was a party to be reckoned with. Second, Rosa would start work immediately. She would get eyes on Sabrina. Who was she meeting? Where was she going? And, using the card from Olivia as a starting point, she would begin a deep dive into the finances of both Sabrina and Novapulse for the last 6 months. Third, my job. They see you as weak, Julia said. I need you to be weak. For now. She informed me that Daniel Price had scheduled the official reading of the will. It was to take place in 2 days, at Ethan's house. It's a power move, Julia explained. She wants to perform her victory on her home turf. You will go. You will look heartbroken, frail, and defeated. You will not have a lawyer with you. Let them believe you are that poor, forgetful old woman. Let them get comfortable. My other task was to contact Ethan's doctors. I left Julia's office and made the call from my rental car. I spoke with Dr. Alistair, Ethan's oncologist. His voice was kind, but professional and guarded, until I explained who I was. Margaret, he said, his tone softening with real sadness. I was so sorry to hear. It was faster than we anticipated. Dr. Alistair, I said, my voice steady. I need to know. In his last appointment, how was he mentally? There was a pause. I could hear him tapping on a keyboard. He was perfectly lucid, tired, of course, but his mind was sharp as a tack. We discussed treatment options, his prognosis. He was clear-headed. Margaret. Absolutely. I braced myself. Did he say anything else? Anything unusual? Another, longer pause. Yes. Actually, it was unusual. He requested a complete, certified copy of his entire medical file. He said he needed it for his personal records. He was very insistent. I signed off on the release myself. I hung up the phone, the final piece clicking into place. My son, my brilliant, dying son, knew. He knew something was wrong. And he was preparing. He was gathering his own evidence. I looked out at the Denver skyline as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of fire and purple. The fear I had been carrying for days was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But it was joined by something new, something hot and sharp. I was no longer a victim being pushed out of a room. I was a mother on a mission. And the counterattack had just begun. I walked into my son's living room, and it was a theatre. Sabrina had arranged the seating to face Ethan's large mahogany desk, where Daniel Price sat like a director. The audience was hers friends I didn't recognize, uncomfortable-looking colleagues from Novapulse, and a few distant cousins of hers I'd met once at the wedding. It was just as Julia had warned, a stage set for a coronation. I followed Julia's instructions. I wore a simple black cardigan, clutched my old leather handbag to my chest, and looked at the floor. I found a single seat in the back corner, invisible and frail. Sabrina was in her element, dressed in a razor-sharp navy blue dress. She stood near the fireplace, accepting condolences that sounded more like congratulations. She saw me, and a slow, cruel smile lit her eyes. She waited until Daniel Price cleared his throat to begin, then raised her voice, projecting to the entire room. "Well, Margaret, I'm so glad you could make it. We have to get through these dull formalities before I can start undoing all of Ethan's questionable design choices." A few people shifted uncomfortably. She didn't care. She walked to the center of the room, a predator claiming her territory. "Now that the cash cow is finally dead," she said, her voice dripping with faux sadness, "I suppose we find out what I'm worth. I already know. Of course. I get the house. I get the shares in Novapulse. I get the accounts. Tens of millions." She turned her gaze fully on me. "I do hope your pathetic little pension is enough for you, dear. It's all you have left." My knuckles were white on the strap of my purse. I could feel the pitying stares. This was the public humiliation she wanted. This was the foundation of her story, the dotty, penniless old mother. I said nothing. Daniel Price looked up from his papers, his expression one of professional annoyance. "If we are quite finished, this is the last will and testament of Ethan Hale, executed 2 weeks prior to his death." He broke the seal on a thick envelope and began to read through the pages silently, scanning the legal text. I watched his face. The practiced, neutral mask of a lawyer suddenly faltered. His eyes widened slightly. He reread a paragraph, his brow furrowing. The smug atmosphere Sabrina had built evaporated into tense silence. He looked up, not at the room, but directly at Sabrina. His voice was no longer accommodating. It was iron. "Ms. Cole," he said, "I must ask you to leave the room." The silence was absolute. Then Sabrina let out a high-pitched, barking laugh. "What, Daniel? Are you joking? Stop being dramatic and read the will. I'm his wife. This is my house." "You are not a beneficiary of this will, Ms. Cole," Daniel stated, his voice flat. "Therefore, you have no legal standing to attend its reading. Please, leave." He turned the page toward her, pointing to a specific clause. "I am a beneficiary. I'm his wife." She shrieked, her composure shattering. "Read it. Read whatever lie she paid you to write." "As you wish," Daniel said. He stood, his voice filling the room, cold and clear. He read the standard openings, and then he paused. Article 4, Section B. "Notwithstanding any other provision, any person who is my legal spouse at the time of my death shall receive none of my assets, property, or interests of any kind, if that person, or an agent acting on their behalf, contests, challenges, or disputes any provision of this will in any court. In the event of such a contest, any and all potential interest that person might have held shall be voided and will pass entirely and immediately to my mother, Margaret Hale." Sabrina's face went from blotchy red to a waxy, chalky white. She couldn't speak. She just stared, vibrating. Daniel Price continued. "As Ms. Cole is not named as a beneficiary. She has no standing here. Mrs. Hale, on the other hand, is named as the sole executor and beneficiary of the entire estate." Sabrina finally found her voice. It was a raw, animalistic scream. "No, he was sick. He was dying. He didn't know what he was doing." She whirled on me, her finger jabbing, spittle flying from her mouth. You did this. You senile old witch. You brainwashed him when he was weak. I'll sue. I'll have this thrown out. This is elder abuse. You preyed on him." She lunged toward me, but Daniel stepped in front of her. "I wouldn't advise that," he said, his voice lethal. "I drafted this document at Mr. Hale's explicit, videotaped request. We have a certified medical evaluation from his oncologist, dated the same day, confirming he was completely lucid and of sound mind. We also have 2 independent, non-interested witnesses who signed with him. This will is ironclad." The word videotaped stopped her cold. The implications hung in the air. Daniel quietly asked the rest of the shocked audience to leave. After they had fled, he turned to me, his expression softening for the first time. "Mrs. Hale, perhaps we should move to the study." In Ethan's office, the room where I had last been treated like a pest, Daniel Price looked exhausted. "I am sorry, Mrs. Hale," he said. "Ethan came to me 3 weeks ago. He was not just sick, he was angry. He had proof, bank statements." My blood ran cold. Proof of what? He suspected Ms. Cole was having an affair. But more than that, he had discovered she was systematically embezzling funds from Novapulse, moving company money into offshore shell accounts. He was building a case against her, but he knew he was running out of time. He knew a standard disinheritance would be tied up in court for years. So, he wrote that clause. He baited a trap, knowing her greed would make her walk right into it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, hand-written envelope. "He also gave me this, to be delivered to you, and only you, after the reading." My name was on the front, in Ethan's familiar, weakening hand. I took it, my fingers numb. "He said to tell you he was sorry," Daniel said softly. "Sorry for letting her get between you." I held the letter, the last piece of my son. This wasn't just a will. This wasn't just about money. It was a charge. It was the last thing my son would ever ask of me. "If I don't make it, Mum, please find the truth for me." Sabrina thought she was fighting for money. I knew, holding that letter, that I was fighting for justice. Sabrina didn't just walk into the trap Ethan set. She tried to burn the trap setter, and the whole forest down. Less than a week after the will reading, a courier delivered a thick, sickening stack of papers to my hotel. She had filed suit. The words on the page were venomous. Undue influence. Exploitation of the sick. Elder abuse. She was petitioning the court to invalidate the new will, claiming I had manipulated a dying man, that I was the one who had preyed on him for his money. It was exactly the public narrative she'd been building since the funeral, and it didn't stop with the courts. The anonymous online attacks began. Obscure blogs and dark corners of social media lit up with posts about the heartless mother-in-law who had stolen the inheritance from the grieving widow. The story painted me as a monster who had forced Sabrina to provide round-the-clock care and then swept in to take everything. It was clever, insidious, and it worked. I got calls from old friends back in Minneapolis, their voices hesitant. "Margaret, we saw this awful. Surely it's not true." I was being isolated, just as she planned. I wanted to scream, to call every newspaper and tell them the truth. I drove to Julia's office, the lawsuit papers trembling in my hand. "This is libel," I said. "Of course it is," Julia said, not even looking up from the copy she'd already received. "It's also bait. She wants you to react publicly. She wants a mud-slinging fight she knows you'll lose. We don't respond. We don't play her game. We play ours. We stick to the law and the numbers. The numbers don't lie. And the numbers were starting to talk. The first report came from Rosa Martinez. It was an email with a zip file attached. No commentary, just photos. My heart pounded as I clicked. It was Sabrina, but not the grieving widow. This Sabrina was laughing, her head thrown back, in a sunny parking lot. Her hands were wrapped around the neck of a man who was definitely not Ethan. He was young, muscular, with the curated good looks of a fitness model. They were kissing. Deeply. The timestamp on the photo was 3 days before Ethan's funeral. Rosa's brief text followed. His name is Lucas Grant, personal trainer. She's been at his apartment for hours at a time, multiple times a week, for at least 3 months. Grant, I asked Julia over the phone. Yes, Julia said, her voice tight. Same last name. No relation. Thank God. But she's arrogant enough not to even hide it. The second wave came from Olivia Brooks. She called Julia terrified. Sabrina was cleaning house at Novapulse, firing anyone loyal to Ethan. Olivia had quit before she could be fired. She emailed Julia a massive, password-protected spreadsheet. It was the company's internal accounting. She didn't even cover her tracks, Julia told me, her voice a mix of disgust and excitement. Column after column, payments for consulting services, medical equipment from vendors that don't exist, all signed off by Sabrina while Ethan was in chemotherapy. Julia immediately hired a forensic accountant. We need someone clean, she said. Given the trainer's name, we can't have anyone accusing us of a conflict of interest. She brought in a man named Ethan Moore. The shared name with my son felt like a strange, sad omen. Moore's report was devastating. The suspicious payments, totaling over $3 million, didn't just go to fake vendors. They were all funneled into a single entity, a brand new shell corporation registered in Wyoming called Silver Pass Consulting, a company with an anonymous owner. But Moore had followed the trail. From Wyoming, the money was wired, in smaller increments, directly into a private savings account, an account in Sabrina Cole's name. While Moore tracked the money, Rosa tracked Sabrina. She followed her to a new law office, one even more expensive than the first. Rosa, with her FBI-honed audacity, managed to sit in the next booth at the adjoining restaurant, her high-tech microphone aimed at their table. The audio file was chilling. It was Sabrina's lawyer, laughing. The goal isn't to win on the first pass, the lawyer said. The goal is to bury the old woman. We'll file motions, we'll appeal, we'll depose her friends, we'll drag this out for years. We bleed her dry. Eventually, she'll be so broke and tired she'll have to settle for a fraction, and you'll get the rest. Julia and I sat in her office late that night. On her large white bulletin board, she pinned the evidence, a photo of Lucas Grant, a printout of the Silver Pass Consulting wire transfer, a quote from the Smear blog, a copy of the lawsuit. She connected them with red yarn, like a detective in an old movie. Affair, embezzlement, smear campaign, litigation abuse. I looked at the map of Sabrina's treachery, and I felt nothing but cold, hard resolve. Julia stepped back, crossing her arms. She thinks she's the plaintiff, pushing you into a corner. She looked at me, her eyes sharp. We're not just defending the will anymore, Margaret. We're going to make Sabrina the defendant, in her lawsuit, and in a new one. Sabrina's counterattack was not legal. It was personal. It was designed to cripple our ability to fight back. Her lawyers filed an emergency motion to have Julia removed from my case, citing an inappropriate and emotionally compromised relationship between attorney and client. Their evidence was a collection of grainy, long-lens photographs taken by a hired investigator. There was one of Julia and me at a diner near her office, late one evening. Another showed me getting out of her car in front of my hotel. The most damning one was a shot through her office window, showing her handing me a box of tissues as I sat hunched over in the chair. Simultaneously, the online smear campaign exploded. Suddenly, local gossip blogs were running stories about the controversial female lawyer who was controlling the unstable and grieving Margaret Hale. The narrative was that Julia was the predator, isolating me from all proper counsel and preying on my loneliness to drive this frivolous lawsuit. I sat in Julia's office, the motion papers trembling in my hand. "Julia, this is my fault," I said, my voice thick. "They're trying to ruin your reputation. I've dragged you into this mud." Julia didn't even look up from the brief she was writing. "Margaret," she said, her voice calm as a frozen lake. "This is the most common dirty trick in the book. When you don't have the facts, you attack the people. When the evidence is against you, you attack the lawyer. This isn't a sign of their strength. It's a sign of their panic." The hearing for the motion to disqualify was held in a smaller, cramped courtroom. Sabrina sat behind her legal team, staring at me with pure hatred. Her lawyer, a slick man with an oily voice, presented his case. He showed the photos, blew them up on a screen for the judge. He spoke of late-night meetings, inappropriate dinners, and Julia's undue influence over my fragile emotional state. When it was Julia's turn, she stood and addressed Judge Naomi Keller, a woman known for her impatience with theatrics. "Your Honor," Julia said, her voice crisp. "What opposing counsel calls an inappropriate dinner was a working session at 8 p.m. where we reviewed a 300-page forensic accounting report. The receipt is attached as Exhibit A. What they call undue influence is me handing my 62-year-old client, whose son's widow just publicly accused her of senility, a tissue." She walked toward the judge. "My client is a retired teacher, not a corporate shark. She is grieving. She is also the victim of a multi-million-dollar fraud. My job is to protect her legal and financial interests. Is opposing counsel suggesting that compassion and basic human decency are now grounds for disqualification? Or is it simply that they cannot comprehend a female attorney effectively defending an elderly female client from their attempts at intimidation?" Judge Keller didn't hesitate. She looked at Sabrina's lawyer. "Motion denied," she snapped. "I have read your filing, and I find zero evidence of any conflict of interest or compromised judgment. What I do find is a very thin attempt to smear opposing counsel. I am warning you. Counselor, you are abusing this court's time. Do not bring this kind of personal garbage into my courtroom again." Sabrina was visibly shaking with rage. We had won. We stood, gathered our papers, and walked out into the hallway, and ran directly into Lucas Grant, the personal trainer, the man from Rosa's photos. He was pale, sweating, and looked like he hadn't slept in days. He saw me and lurched forward. "Mrs. Hale." "Your Mrs.? Hale. Right." He stammered, his eyes wide with panic. Julia stepped in front of me, a protective, professional shield. "Mr. Grant, I would advise you not to speak to my client." "No, please," he begged, his voice cracking. You don't understand. She's threatening me. I thought it was just... I don't know what I thought, but she called me. She said if I get subpoenaed, I better stick to the story, or she'll bury me. She said I'll be ruined right along with her. He was unraveling right there in the courthouse corridor. She used me. She was just using me to feel good while she waited. My blood went cold. Waited for what? I asked, my voice a whisper. Lucas looked at me, his eyes desperate. For him to die. That's what she bragged about it. She laughed. He was almost crying. She showed me the life insurance policy, a huge one. She said, "It's fine, babe. Just a few more months. We just have to be patient, and we'll be free and rich." The world tilted. Free and rich. She wasn't just waiting for him to die. She was looking forward to it. Julia grabbed his arm. Her voice was pure steel. All compassion gone. "Mr. Grant, you are going to stop talking. Right now. You are going to come with us to my office. You will sign a sworn affidavit detailing every single word you just said, and you will turn over every text message, email, and gift receipt you have from Sabrina Cole. In exchange, and only if your information is complete and truthful, we will consider not naming you in our civil countersuit. Do you understand me?" He just nodded, a terrified, broken man. He was the weapon we never knew we needed. Lucas Grant's sworn affidavit was a blueprint of calculated cruelty. His text messages, when laid out by Julia's team, created a timeline that made my stomach churn. The affair hadn't started after Ethan got sick, or during a lonely period. It had started the very week Ethan received his diagnosis. Sabrina hadn't sought comfort. She had immediately begun planning her exit strategy. The timeline also showed her financial moves. While Ethan was scheduling his first round of chemotherapy, Sabrina was quietly meeting with an insurance broker, taking out a substantial new life insurance policy on him and increasing the payout on their existing one. But it was the texts she sent to Lucas that stopped my heart. I read the printouts on Julia's desk, the cold, black and white words of a woman impatient for a payday. "Ethan just keeps clinging to this life," she had written after a doctor's visit. And another. A week later, the doctor said he might live another 6 months. 6. I am so sick of this. She wasn't frustrated by the illness. She was frustrated by his survival. I had to get up and walk to the window. The pain was physical, a sharp, suffocating pressure in my chest. To know my son, in his darkest, most terrifying moments, was being viewed as a burden, a simple obstacle to his wife's new life. But as I stared at the Denver traffic, a different emotion rose up. Not grief, but a cold, fierce validation. My son hadn't been a fool. He hadn't been blind. He must have sensed it. He saw the coldness. He found the missing money. And he acted. He changed his will, not just to protect me, but to punish her. Julia, however, was focused on the darker implication. "If she was this impatient," she said, letting the sentence hang in the air. She immediately got on the phone, reaching out to the oncology ward where Ethan had received his treatment. She spoke to the charge nurse, a woman with a clear memory of her patients. The nurse confirmed Ethan's lucidity, but she also remembered Sabrina. She was difficult, the nurse told Julia, her voice tight. Too eager. She was always asking questions about his medication, but not in a concerned way, in an administrative way. Then, the nurse recalled a specific, unsettling incident. She argued with me. She wanted to take a vial of his breakthrough pain medication, the really strong, controlled stuff, home with her. She said it would be more comfortable for Ethan. I told her absolutely not. That specific drug is liquid gold and has to be administered and logged by a professional on site. She got very cold after that. Accused me of poor patient care. Julia pushed for a review of Ethan's medical charts. The conclusion was agonizingly vague. There was no single, clear sign of foul play, no poison in his final blood work. But his decline in the last 48 hours had been, in the oncologist's formal notes, precipitous and faster than anticipated. We were left with a terrible, shadowy suspicion, a moral certainty that didn't equal legal proof. "We can't prove she murdered him," Julia said, her voice flat and pragmatic as we sat back in her office. A good defense lawyer would tear the impatient texts apart as circumstantial. We'd look desperate, and we might lose the high ground. So, we don't go there. We don't need to. She turned back to the whiteboard. We stick to what we can prove. We will use the affair, the insurance policies, and the embezzlement to paint a portrait of a faithless, greedy woman who committed fraud. We will destroy her character in civil court, not criminal. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place that afternoon. Rosa Martinez called. She'd been tracking Sabrina's current movements. "She's not just planning," Rosa said. "She's moving. She has the house, Ethan's house, in a private, off-market sale. It's already in escrow." And then, the kicker. She was planning to use the money from the Silver Pass consulting account as the down payment on a new penthouse. The pre-approval was in both her name and Lucas Grant's. An hour later, Ethan Moore's final forensic report landed. The $3 million from Novapulse was confirmed. But he'd found something else. Sabrina hadn't just stolen from the company's bottom line. She had systematically drained the smaller, secondary accounts, the ones Ethan had set up years ago. The funds he had earmarked to donate to the cancer research foundations that had been so crucial during his treatment. She hadn't just stolen from my son. She had stolen his legacy. Julia stood at the window, looking down at the street. The whiteboard behind her was now a spider's web of interconnected crimes. "We have it all," she said, her voice quiet. "We have everything we need to not only validate Ethan's will, but to file a countersuit that will strip her of every cent she stole. The embezzlement alone will probably trigger a criminal investigation, whether we push for it or not." She turned to face me, her eyes unblinking. "We have enough to obliterate her. The question is, Margaret, how far do you want to take this?" The main hearing began on a Tuesday. Judge Naomi Keller's courtroom was packed, the air tense and cold. Sabrina's lawyers went first, and their strategy was exactly what Julia had predicted: pure, calculated emotion. They painted me as a manipulative, bitter mother-in-law, a controlling figure who had despised Sabrina from the moment she met her. I was, according to them, a commanding personality who couldn't let her son go. Then, Sabrina took the stand. It was a true theatrical performance, dressed in a modest charcoal grey suit. She wept, her voice trembling as she described my supposed cruelty. She told me, multiple times, that I was just a gold digger. Sabrina cried, dabbing her eyes. She hated that Ethan was happy with me. Her lawyer gently prodded her. "And Mr. Hale, how did he react to his mother's attention?" "He was just so tired," she whispered, a perfect tear rolling down her cheek. He was so sick, and she would call every single week, demanding things, controlling his schedule. He was exhausted by her. He would have signed anything just to get her to stop. She took advantage of him when he was at his weakest. She had done it. She had painted the perfect picture of a dying man, weak-willed, bullied by his mother. When Julia rose for the cross-examination, her voice was quiet, almost conversational. "Ms. Cole, you have testified that your husband was weak, tired, and completely overwhelmed by his mother's influence." "Yes," Sabrina said, her voice watery. "Then can you explain to the court, if he was so manipulated, why is it that Mr. Hale himself requested his company's financial records? Why did he proactively schedule a meeting with his corporate attorney, Mr. Price, and not his mother? And why did he execute this new will in secret, without telling his supposedly controlling mother anything about it?" Sabrina's tears stopped. The mask flickered. I don't know. She must have threatened him, or forced him. Forced him. A man who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. Julia turned to the judge. The narrative of the weak, manipulated victim simply doesn't fit the man. But the narrative of a faithless wife does. Julia pivoted. The screens in the courtroom lit up. "Your Honor, we will now present the forensic accounting report from Mr. Ethan Moore." She walked the court, item by item, through the financial abyss. On this date, while Mr. Hale was in the hospital receiving inpatient chemotherapy, a transfer for $100,000 was authorized by Ms. Cole, the recipient, Silver Pass Consulting. She showed the fake invoices for medical equipment that never existed. She showed Sabrina's signature on every single transaction. Sabrina's lawyer stood. "Objection. This is irrelevant. Those were payments for external consultants needed to keep the company running while Mr. Hale was ill." External consultants. Julia's voice was sharp. She clicked to the next slide. It was the incorporation document for Silver Pass Consulting, an external consultancy that was registered in Wyoming just 3 days after Mr. Hale's cancer diagnosis, a company whose sole listed owner is a Ms. Darlene Petty. Ms. Cole's distant cousin. The final slide. A bank statement. "And a company," Julia said, her voice dropping, "that transferred 95% of those funds directly into Ms. Cole's private, personal savings account." Sabrina was gripping the rail of the witness box, her knuckles white. "Your Honor," Julia said, "the opposing counsel has built their entire case on the claim that Ethan Hale was not of sound mind and was a victim of undue influence. We have one final piece of evidence. It was found by Mr. Price on Mr. Hale's personal laptop, in a hidden, encrypted folder. It is a video Mr. Hale recorded himself 2 weeks before his death." Judge Keller nodded. "You may play it." The courtroom screens flickered. And then, there was my son. My hand flew to my mouth. He was shockingly thin, sitting up in his hospital bed. But his eyes were clear and furious. He held up his phone, showing the date on the screen. "I am recording this." Ethan's voice, raspy but strong, filled the silent room. "My name is Ethan Hale. Today is October 10th. I am of sound mind, and I am not under duress." He took a shallow breath. I have recently discovered that my wife, Sabrina Cole, has been systematically embezzling large sums of money from my company, Novapulse. I also have significant proof that she has been unfaithful." He looked directly into the camera, and I felt he was looking at me. "I have, therefore, created a new will. I am leaving my entire estate to my mother, Margaret Hale. Not because she asked me to. She knows nothing of this, but because she is the only person I trust to protect what I've built, and to take care of the decent people who work for me." Sabrina was making a small, choking sound, like a dying animal. Ethan wasn't done. He held the actual will up to the camera. "I have also included a specific clause," he said, and I could hear the cold anger, the strategic brilliance in his voice. "And I will read it aloud." He read the entire in terrorem clause, word for word. "Any person who is my legal spouse shall receive none of my assets if that person contests this will." He lowered the paper and looked into the lens one last time, his gaze like steel. "I wanted to make sure," he said, "that anyone who is greedy enough to challenge this will dig their own grave." The video went black. The courtroom was utterly, profoundly silent. I looked over at Sabrina. Her face was a waxy, bloodless white. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to hide them in her lap. Her lawyer had his head in his hands, not even looking at his client. The argument of undue influence had just been vaporized. My son had reached out from the grave, and with his own words, he had just won the war. Judge Naomi Keller called a recess for 1 hour to review the video and the corresponding medical files. When she returned, the courtroom was silent, the air thick enough to cut. She looked over her glasses, first at Sabrina's lawyer, then at me, and finally settled her gaze on Sabrina. "The court has reviewed all evidence," Judge Keller began, her voice leaving no room for argument. "It is the finding of this court that the will dated October 10th is unequivocally valid. The testimony from Mr. Hale's physician, combined with his own videotaped statement, confirms he was fully lucid, of sound mind, and not acting under duress or undue influence." She paused, letting the words land. "Furthermore, this court takes special note of Article 4, Section B, the in terrorem clause." She looked directly at Sabrina, her eyes like chips of ice. "Ms. Cole, you were warned by your own late husband. By filing this lawsuit, you knowingly and willingly activated that specific provision. You have, by your own hand, forfeited any claim, however remote, to this estate. Therefore," Judge Keller continued, "this court affirms Margaret Hale as the sole executor and beneficiary of the estate of Ethan Hale." But she wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the court finds in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Hale, on the countersuit. Ms. Cole is hereby ordered to repay the full amount of $3,042,000 to Novapulse Diagnostics. Additionally, Ms. Cole is enjoined from holding any managerial or executive position in the medical or healthcare industry in any state for a period of 10 years. It was the 10-year ban that broke her. The money was one thing. The destruction of her professional ambition was another. "No!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. The polished mask was gone, replaced by a raw, contorted face of pure malice. "This is a conspiracy. You're all in on it. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You killed him. You killed him with your stress, your constant hounding. You're the one who killed my husband." 2 judicial police officers were instantly on her. It's all a lie, she screamed as they grabbed her arms. She fought them, her hair coming undone, her designer suit twisted. I'll appeal, you'll never see a dime. They dragged her from the courtroom, her curses echoing down the marble hallway. The image of her, dishevelled and raving, was a stark contrast to the smug woman who had announced her victory at the will reading. Sabrina's lawyer, pale and defeated, approached Julia and me. He looked like a man who hadn't been paid. Mrs. Hale. Julia, he said, adjusting his tie. My client is volatile, but the embezzlement charges, the evidence is strong. The district attorney will likely be notified. However, if Mrs. Hale agrees not to actively pursue or encourage a criminal investigation, my client will sign everything today. No appeals. She will sign the judgment, agree to the repayment schedule, and accept the industry ban. You can end this. Right now. He was offering me a quick end. Years of criminal court, appeals, and public fights, or peace. I looked at Julia. She gave me a slight nod, leaving it to me. I thought about Ethan. I thought about the lies. Peace wasn't enough. I needed truth. I have one condition, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I will agree to the terms, but she must sign one more thing. What? The lawyer asked, wary. A full, public confession, to be filed with the court as part of this judgment, an admission that she committed embezzlement, an admission that she was engaged in an extramarital affair, and an admission that she knowingly and maliciously defamed me. I want that, on the public record, forever. The lawyer looked horrified. Mrs. Hale, that is the deal, Julia cut in. Take it or leave it. It took 2 hours, but they brought Sabrina, looking small and broken, back into a side room. She sat at a table, the paper in front of her. She looked up at me, her eyes overflowing with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. She would never be sorry. She was only sorry she got caught. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. She signed the admission. She signed the judgment. I watched her sign away her future. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I just felt finished. I felt the cold, hard weight of a promise fulfilled. I gave her one last, long look, not of anger, but of simple, cold dismissal. She was no longer a person. She was just a problem that had been solved. Outside, on the courthouse steps, a small crowd of reporters had gathered. Julia and I, flanked by Rosa, Aaron, and Olivia. My son's true legacy walked out. They shouted questions. I held up a hand. The cameras flashed. Ethan trusted me, I said, my voice clear in the cold air. And today, I did exactly what a mother has to do. I didn't take any more questions. That evening, I used my new keys to enter the house. Ethan's house. My house. It still smelled faintly of Sabrina's expensive perfume. I walked straight to his study, the room I'd been thrown out of. I opened the heavy curtains and pushed open the window, letting the cool, clean Denver air rush in. I took the crumpled letter Ethan had written me from my purse. I smoothed it out and placed it on his desk, right next to the embossed, official copy of the court's final judgment. I stood there for a long time. You wrote one sentence to change everything. Ethan? I whispered to the empty room. The rest? I handled it. I turned and walked out, leaving the study door just slightly ajar. I would protect his legacy. I would run his company. But I would not live in the darkness of this fight. I would live in the light he left behind. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you are listening from, so please drop your city or state in the comments below, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Please like this video, and if you can, support us by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.